charter review revisions. And first, before we kick off with the presentation, I just want to all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. Flag's behind us.
Yeah.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Apologies again for a little bit of a late start here, but we do have, for the benefit of the public, first of all, I have a presentation that will just walk through kind of what tonight is all about, and it'll talk through the process that we got to get here about proposed revisions to the charter. And I'm going to share my screen with a presentation, and so we can start. Okay. Yep, great. All right. So with that, I think I got to go back to the PowerPoint first. Sorry, one more second. We're just.
Yeah.
Slide phone. Okay, so now do this. All right, we did the Pledge of Allegiance, and so now I just want to make some introductions. We have the members of the Board of Selectmen, myself, Peggy Lyons, first Selectwoman, Al Goldberg, who could not be here tonight for the public information session, Noreen Kokoruda, who's joined us, Scott Murphy, and Bruce Wilson. We were all involved in deliberating and assisting and coming up with this proposed revisions to the charter. And I also want to highlight our Charter Review Commission, which is required by state statute before we can make any changes to the town charter. And some of those will be joining us tonight to answer questions, but it includes Joe McDougall, who chaired the Charter Review Commission, and this has been an 18-month process, and it was a huge amount of time and effort made by volunteer citizens to do this. So we're grateful for their service. Mark Casparino, Liz Daly, Matthew Gordon, Bob O'Connor, David Osterman, and Joan Walker. So I thought after I go through the presentation, if Jacqueline, you can elevate them to participate in the conversation, they can help give their perspective in going through this process. So with that, I will start off with what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about what is the town charter and why are we changing it? What was the process timeline that led us to tonight? Highlighting some of the selected revisions to the town charter, and then we can open it up for questions from the members of the public. So I think the first thing is just to talk about what is a charter. And basically, and I'm just thinking, Jeff, if you want to, because I'm going to be giving the presentation right now, so just so they can hear me better, hopefully that's not going to be blocking the sound. So a charter is really the guiding document, kind of like the Constitution for the town of Connecticut. So it basically defines how we're organized, the powers of town government, what its function is, and essential procedures. So it really it can guide us both big picture things, like how many elected boards we have. Do we have a board of selectmen? Do we have a board of finance? What do they do and how do they meet? So the charter lays all that out. But it also gets into the nitty-gritty about, for example, how we hire our employees. So it really is an important document that impacts how town government functions. Charters are granted through a higher authority, and for the town of Madison, it's the people's body that through town referendum that is passed by eligible voters. So this charter revision proposal is going to be on the ballot in November, and we'll talk about the process to get there, but so this will be something voted on by the people. The people of the town of Madison decide what they want in their charter. Our current charter dates back to 2006, so it's about 16 years old. And there was an attempt to make some revisions back in 2015, and unfortunately those did not pass at referendum. There was some kind of bigger picture things that were recommended during that charter, but it did not pass, and so we're kind of living with the same document that we had back in 2006. The state requires a town to review its charter at least every 10 years. The process is dictated by state statute, so it's very regulated with strict timelines, and it requires the creation of a charter review commission, which I just introduced earlier. The Board of Selectmen appointed our charter review commission back in January of 2021. And so, the amendments that we're going to be talking about tonight are based on recommendations by the Charter Review Commission after an 18-month process. So very lengthy process, many opportunities for the public to weigh in, many public meetings, and then this was taken to the board. There was some back and forth between us and the Charter Review Commission with some refinements we thought were needed, and then finally with the board approving a document they thought was worthy to take to the public for their vote. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And then why do we need to change the town charter? Well, I think there was a number of things that specifically what the board and also the Charter Review Commission felt were important. And that includes just modernizing it, kind of changing some of the nomenclature. So using the term chair versus chairman and updating it for modern times. Also regulatory changes that happened at the state level. So we need to kind of update our charter to reflect those. Also account for public access, some of the technology changes that have happened, allowing for hybrid meetings and things like that. Timeline constraints, we have a very rigid, tight timeline for approval of the budget, for example, and so we were trying to create more flexibility to account for timeline constraints, and also we have to do a lot of public notices, and we don't have a lot of newspapers these days, printed newspapers, so we're required to do, notices in the newspaper, and it is a very difficult timeline to get everything to line up and make it happen. And then also just lessons we learned from COVID, where we lived in a state of emergency for an extended period of time that had never happened in the history of the town. So learning from that experience and trying to incorporate some of those lessons learned into the new charter. Other thing was just cleaning up the language. There was definitely some errors and omissions in our previous charter, and also things that were repetitive. And then I think there was an overall objective to pare down to the meaningful essentials. The charter is the guiding light, the big picture document. It shouldn't be getting into the nitty gritty of things sometimes. And so we wanted to take as many things out that were nitty gritty and also tie as much as we could to state regulations. So if the state changed something, we didn't have to go back and revise our charter. Our charter would just kind of follow the state in certain areas where we had to anyway. And then also just clearly communicate and define the roles of elected and appointed boards and remove any ambiguities. And really, some things were subject to interpretation, so we tried to take that out and make it really clear about what the roles and responsibilities are for the board members. And then update the town for dollar amounts to make them more meaningful in today, where we are in terms of the size of the budgets and the population for the town. And then try to address some of the community concerns about public participation and the effectiveness of the town meeting form of government. And the CRC did talk a lot about this at the beginning of their process about should we exploring other forms of government, a town manager, and I think there were a number of people who did advocate for that. And I think the overall impression was that the town had conducted a government studies committee prior to the Charter Review Commission. And really the message and the takeaway had been that town meetings seem to be serving us okay right now. There is a trend across the state moving towards different forms of government. And I think they tried to address some of those issues in other things. And we'll talk about what some of those other ways they changed the charter to touch on some of the concerns that the public had raised about the town meeting form of government. And so what process did we go through? Well, as I said earlier, back in 2021, in January, the Board of Selectmen appointed the commission, and then they started meeting pretty much weekly since January of 2021. They met with a lot of people, they talked to former board members, current board members, members of the public, different boards and commissions, met with staff to get a lot of input, because really the staff have to live with this document. It affects how they do their job every day, so it's an important document for them. And then also getting community feedback, and they did that through 3 different public hearings, one in February, one in November, and then one in April. And after the April public hearing, the commission then made a recommendation of changes to the Board of Selectmen, and then our board kind of tackled it in May and early part of June, had a lot of, I think, detailed and strong discussion on everything, and really appreciated the great work that was done by the commission. We made a few of our own changes, and we made some recommendations back to the Charter Review Commission. We said, and this is a process the state requires, and we said, we think these things should be added as well or amended, and then we'd like to hear your thoughts again on this. And then they met in early July, approved a revised draft, taking some of our comments into account, and sent that draft back to us. And then our board unanimously approved the final charter draft with all of the changes that the CRC recommended, some one small minor technical thing about some wording that we realized wasn't quite right. And so when you see in the minutes, you'll see like a rejection of this one thing. That was just more of a process thing, but overall accepted unanimously all the proposals by the Charter Review Commission. And with that, then the Board of Selectmen then needs to put this on the ballot, and we have to do that through questions. And we had 2 meetings where we discussed questions, and we'll be finalizing that conversation tonight at our Board of Selectmen meeting. Those questions, once we vote on them, are going to be put on the ballot. We have to get them to the town clerk by the first week in September, I think it is, or early September. And because this is going to go on a state ballot, because this is the same ballot they're going to vote for the governor and the state, all the state offices for. And you'll also have 2 questions about the town of Madison, and that'll be unique to our ballot that we'll see here in Madison. And then the public will get to vote on that. So that's kind of the process that we've gone through. And then, so what's different? And I kind of highlighted, I mean, there's a very long piece of information that will be provided to the public that highlights all the different changes that are being proposed to it. A lot of them are wordsmithing, clarifying things, cleaning stuff up, but there's some more high-level things that we thought it would be worthy talking about tonight. The first one is we did not change the form of government, and those are all the reasons that I talked about earlier, that the Charter Review decided to stay with the town meeting form of government, although they did recommend that the board, after this gets through the process in November, and if it passes, that the Board of Selectmen consider longer-term changes to the form of government, because changing the form of government is a big deal. And so we don't want to do that quickly, and we want to spend time and do it deliberately. This was really to fix a lot of issues we saw with the existing charter so we could function better. So the focus was on making a more effective, efficient, and meaningful charter for the town. One of the changes was increasing the quorum of 75 people to 100 people at a town meeting. And I think, once again, this was trying to take things to town meeting. There are significant issues. And so, to be honest, we rarely have made quorum. I think it's been twice in the last 10 years. And I think Nancy counted it was maybe 7 in the last 15 years where we've gotten to that 75 threshold. But we've had probably almost 100 town meetings, so it just shows the participation isn't there. And so the thought was raising it to at least 150 so that we don't have a small advocacy group potentially hijacking a town meeting at times for specific issues. So it just elevates the threshold, but still way below what the actual electorate is, which is over 13,000 registered voters in the town. So that's a recommendation, and this is also below a lot of other towns. A lot of other towns are at 200 or 250 for quorum. The other thing that will also be likely a separate question on the ballot is increasing the term from 2 years to 4 years for both the first selectman's office as well as the Board of Selectmen. And there was a lot of discussion about this, and I think there were a number of reasons why the commission recommended it. One of the reasons is aligning it with the Board of Education and the Board of Finance, the 2 other elected boards, so that all boards are now in a 4-year rotational cycle. The other thought, and this was from a lot of feedback from the community as well as from the staff, was improving continuity in town leadership and in management and planning. And it also follows a statewide trend. Our neighboring town of Guilford has gone to 4 years. Also Durham has gone to 4 years, and there's a lot of other towns that are considering or have transitioned to 4 years. And what we're finding is that people are either picking to go to 4 years for the first selectman term, or they're changing the form of government to a town manager. Because the reality is the first selectman is a town manager. The first selectman's job is to be the town manager. And most town managers in non-first selectman towns are actually people who've worked in government for a long time, and a lot of them have degrees in public administration. Whereas an elected first selectman tends to be somebody who comes from outside of government. And so it takes time to get up to speed, learn how to do the job, and learn how to get things done in the government. So the thought was giving more time for that process so that that person in that role can be more effective. And so that's what some of the thinkings. I know different board members had other views on my board about whether or not we should go to 4 years, but we thought it was worthy for the public to make that decision about. So that's the most significant change, I would say, that is proposed in this charter. One of the other changes was increasing the Board of Finance membership from 6 to 7. I think typically you rarely have boards that are even number boards. You usually have odd number boards so that you don't have potential for gridlock or tied votes. Most towns are either 5 or 7 Board of Finance members, so we're kind of unique to have 6. And I think that this was just trying to kind of create just continuity with a majority of towns and kind of eliminate the potential for possible gridlock at the Board of Finance. Next thing was approval of special appropriations, raising the threshold from $50,000 to $250,000, and this is an aggregate from one town department. This kind of follows with trying to make that town meeting more meaningful. If you look at these numbers, they seem big, but the reality is we have a $90 million town and school budget. So these are less than 0.0001% of the budget. So it's a very small, low threshold. Even if you go to 250, we're trying to make it so that if you go to a town meeting, it's something that people are going to really care about. $50,000 is the cost of a car, that maybe a car breaks down and we have to replace it outside of our replacement cycle. A piece of equipment fails. So $50,000 in today's world and the size of our budget is to me, just basic operational things that we might have to do at times outside of the budget. 250 makes it a different thing, a more meaningful thing. And both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance would still need to approve any of these things. So that does not change at all. It just changes the threshold. Another item was just on boards and commissions that are designated in the charter. So they're not, no one's recommending that we don't have these boards and commissions. What we're doing is we're going to take them out of the document, the charter, and unless they're required by state statute. So like planning and zoning, and some of those boards are required by state statute. But instead, those boards and commissions are still going to exist. We're going to create them under an ordinance. And if they're under a Board of Selectmen ordinance, then we can make changes. We can update the charge of the commission. We can eliminate it if it's defunct. It no longer matters, if it's irrelevant or not appropriate for modern towns, without having to change the whole charter. And so that's one of the things. So it's not, I know some people originally when they saw this, they said they're getting rid of boards and commissions. I'm like, no, we're not. We're pretty much gonna have all the same ones most likely, but we're just, how they're gonna be charged and created is gonna be under a different process. The other thing is there was a lot of discussion about the authority of the first selectman versus the Board of Selectmen, and then also the Board of Finance. And so we tried to clarify those roles so there were less ambiguity around that, and also align it with state statute, because the state statute does dictate that what certain boards are allowed to do or empowered to do, and we wanted to make sure that everything was updated and aligned with that. And so we had a lot of conversation around that, and I think we came to a good place. So there's less ambiguity and more clarity in that. The budget timeline is now tied more to state statute. We had a very rigid, tight timeline where a window of opportunity of when the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and when we take a budget to referendum. And so this did not allow a lot of wiggle room. So all we're doing is giving us a broader bandwidth to do that in, but we will still have to have it done by the end of May. Normally we're like the 3rd week in May or 2nd week in May, I can't remember exactly when. It might be that we'll have a referendum earlier. And it gives us a little more flexibility to create a timeline that works and also meets with a lot of the public notices and things like that, and also absentee ballots. That was another problem we had. It was really hard to do absentee ballots. We made it work this last time, but it was hard to do it with a tight timeline. So that'll be a positive, I think, for voters. I talked about nomenclature, and there was a lot of discussion from what I remember hearing about, the first selectman versus the select woman, and is it select person? And I think there was not a consensus of what is the right term, but allowing the Board of Selectmen to decide what they wanted to call themselves. And so this will be something I think eventually other states have moved. I think Connecticut might move in this direction, where they might dictate that the selectmen is changed. But right now we're just allowing the opportunity for the Board of Selectmen to make that choice. But we also said, rather than referring to chairman, we say chair, things like that. So if you look through the document, it's more gender neutral in the document. The other, and I guess final thing was term limits for the chairs of the various boards and commissions. And this was just creating an opportunity, I think, to just have some fresh thinking, at the chairs of the different boards, because sometimes you do get people in who do a great job and they're loved, but they've been there a long time, and it's really hard for somebody to try to change on a board when you have the same continuing leadership for an extended period of time. So this just means that somebody has to take a break. If they've been in that seat for 4 years, the chair, they have to kind of cycle off for a year, and then they may get reelected again, and they can serve another 4 years. And then every year you have to reelect that chair. So I think we were doing that in practice, it just hadn't been highlighted in the charter. So we're just clarifying that so that people are following it. And so I think that was kind of there's, like I said, you'll see a more extensive document that'll be available online soon that will walk through these in detail. It'll be pages long and a lot of nuances and a lot of legalese, but this was really substantively, I think, the biggest changes that both boards spent the most time talking about, I think. And so that's kind of the summary. And so I guess with that, we can lead that to, maybe I'd like to invite board members for a few comments, and then charter committee members if they want to make some comments, and then we'll take questions from the public. So I will stop sharing there. And maybe start with board members. Anybody want to make a comment or two before we get into questions?
Well, I mean, I guess I have to say, I thank my fellow board members here, with Al not included, that it was an incredibly collaborative process. I felt like there was a lot of respect in the room, there was a lot of listening to each other, there was a lot of information sharing, and obviously listening to what the commission brought forward to us. And I thought we had a really healthy conversation, a lot of deliberation about a lot of tough issues, but I felt like we were very unified in our deliberations and our conversations, and I think we got to a really great place for the town. So I was very proud of the work that we did.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It was a good process and well thought out, and I think we're in a good place. So
yeah, very.
I first of all, I want to thank the committee. I think that was key to this whole thing. And how smart were we asking Joe McDougall to chair it?
Mm-hmm.
As you know, I was on it for, what month did they start? I got off in November. I was on maybe 9 months.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And I had never been on a charter review before. It was really education for me. My perspective on some things, some of the big things. The town manager thing, when we discussed it, now unless it happened after I left, but when we discussed it, to be quite honest with you, there were very few people, including staff, that came out and said they wanted to change the form of government. In fact, only 2 staff members. And I would say maybe less than 5 town people, including Gus Horvath, who's no longer a Madison resident.
He's Clinton now, right?
Yeah. And really, I think when we finally, the last conversation I had with this committee on it, Ira Bloom was there. And Gus was brought up that Clinton had just switched. And Ira was surprised that we were considering it. He said, I've never had a town that changed their form of government when everything was going well. It was always just, like Clinton was trying to handle a problem. And they felt they had to change their government because of it. So I think, and we have had a subcommittee before I was on this board that looked into it. So it's not that we're not going to continue to look, but I hardly felt from being on that, serving on that committee, that this was a priority. Even from what we heard, seriously, other than 2 staff members, it was less than 5 people. So not that we ever had a lot of people. The term limits was one thing that I wasn't in favor of changing. I had to run 7 times for the seat. It's not always fun to do. And only once did I have an opponent. But I think if you look at government in Connecticut, our state senate is 2 years, our state reps are 2 years, and I think because they set policy, and that's the difference. I think with the Board of Selectmen, the way the town's going, what we're addressing comes from our board, from this board. And I think to ask citizens to not to be able to weigh in for 4 years, I think is a problem. In Durham's situation, they have the unique thing that they have a sort of a lifeline from town clerk to first selectman. their last three first selectmen have come from being the town clerk. It was, I've never seen that,
Well,
never.
that's an elected position, they're also on.
Right.
So these are elected positions, they're just moving up and down.
Right, you're right.
Yeah.
But it's just, when Laura Francis left, she was leaving after so many years, because she had been town clerk, I think like for 15 years or 14 years. So anyway, I was not in favor of it. I've worked with so many boards, and this is not on any one person or whatever. I just think, you're right, it would be easier if you had the continuity. But but you can do a lot of damage in 2 years. And to think that the citizens can see it, our town's going in a direction they don't want it to go, and they've got to sit on their hands for 4 years. I just think what we have works. And I know it's gonna be a question, and I'm really glad we pulled it out. I think that's important. But I want to thank this committee. It was wonderful, the conversations we had, and what was wonderful about this committee was it was a real blend of people that have been involved a long time and brand new people to town. And I think it was a 50-50 split. I think that was really worked out well. So thank you all.
I'd just like to echo that. I think this group of volunteers really stands out as the example of volunteers really digging in and spending time and coming back to us with a very, very high quality product. And then when we took it in for our part, we did push it around pretty hard.
Yeah, we did.
We had a lot of conversations about it, re-engaged the commission, and I think it really does shine as an example of how well Madison can run when we're all working towards the same goal. I think to people reading this and becoming educated, my comments are that it's not perfect. I don't personally agree with everything on it. The special appropriations, I understand the logic behind it. Personally, I think it should be very, very hard for government to spend your money outside of the normal budget cycle, if not always. But I understand the logic behind it and the modernization of the number. I think at the highest level, what I would say is there is more good in this draft for you to approve. And I would encourage you not to throw the baby out with the bathwater if there's something in there. I think this is a document that should get approved by the voters. The 4-year terms, you can really go both ways. You do have the opportunity to weigh in on that as a separate question. And I want to thank the commission for coming at this process with the idea that they would break out some of the important stuff. So I feel good about this on the whole, and I would encourage people to look at the document, not in the spirit of trying to pick it apart and finding things you don't like, but looking at it as a modernization and an update for a good working foundation for Madison government. And just, in addition to the volunteers, I think it's really worthwhile to call out Lauren Rhines and the yeoman work that she did to support the commission and to go off and do research with other towns and with the state statutes. I think she did a fabulous job, and the commission will say it all day long. I think it's worthy of us saying it all day long as well.
Great, well, thank you. And I guess if we have any committee members that would like to make a few comments, and then we can go to any questions from the members of the public.
Well, yeah, so my name is Matt Gordon, one of the Charter Review Commission members. And so thank you for the opportunity. This was a lot of work, but it was a great team. We had a lot of really fruitful and deep conversations to get where the draft that's sitting before you now that we're going to be discussing. It was a great way to serve Madison. I definitely recommend anybody who's interested in volunteering. It was a lot of fun. And as Noreen was saying too, for me, being one of the newer people in town and not being exposed to politics, it was very educational. I definitely got a lot out of it myself as well too. Yeah, you're bringing up good points. There was a lot of things in this charter that were reviewed. It's boiled down to those questions in front of you. our hope, one of the things that happened last time was that the charter, when it went to referendum, was posed as one question, and that was it, take it or leave it. And now that you're going to be seeing that we took out some of the salient questions to be asked. But as Bruce was saying too, think about those questions, but think of it as a whole, I should say. Think of it as a whole, and then the more nitty-gritty questions to be considered. But I think that as you go through the document, you will see, compared to older versions, that this is modernized. It's relevant. We took a lot of the things that we've learned over the last 3 years and applied them here. One of the things that Bruce said as we started off was future-proof this. And so that's what we try to do here. So, but thank you.
Anybody else from the commission? No? Okay. All right, well, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of members of the public. We have, I'll go to, I will go to maybe the online and then we'll get to in-person. Is that okay? So let's go to attendees online. Does anybody have a statement they want to make, or anybody's hand raised, I guess is what I should say.
Yeah, Joe Matos, hand is raised. I'll allow him to speak.
Okay.
Oh, Joe Mako.
Oh, okay, yes, Joe Mako, 22 Randy Drive. Question on the extension of the term from 2 to 4 years for the select person. Are there still term limits for that office?
There has never been term limits for that office. So that's
Well, then, shouldn't there be?
I think it was discussed, but I don't know what the conclusion was of the commission. That none of the elected boards have term limits.
I think.
I think it's interesting that you're talking about changing the chairman of boards and commissions, voting him every year because you want to get a change, and you have nothing on term limits for. You're changing it from 2 to 4 years, and as Noreen said, you're stuck with somebody for 4 years now instead of 2.
Well, I think that the thought was those are elected positions, so by default, the public is making that determination, whereas non-elected boards and commissions is where we have the term limits for chairs. And because those boards are appointed boards, so there's no opportunity for the public to vote on who's going to be chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee or the Shellfish Commission.
Right, and I think it's important to call out that the membership on the commission is not limited by term, it's only the role as chair.
Right.
And then that person would have to take the 5th year off, and then would be eligible in subsequent years for.
But it's also important, like, if nobody steps up, right, then they can still run.
So that was my question. Could we ever have a problem with a board that, we see things like that are controversial, that they all want to be chairman, but that's not most appointed boards. You look at Water Pollution Control Authority, it's like, you do it, no, you do it. And I'm sure Beach and Rec, a lot of them. Is there an out for us if no one else wants to do it? Is there a way for us to work around that?
I mean, I guess in theory, the Board of Selectmen can make an appointment.
Yeah, we can nominate
Or
someone.
can we go, but
But I think, I don't think there's ever gonna be an issue where somebody's not gonna just take the name. And I think that also when you have one chair for such a long time, sometimes it becomes like their board, you know what I'm saying? So this is trying to.
I don't think that's not a bad idea, but I just was wondering,
Yeah.
will we ever be in a bind over trying to enforce this?
Certainly could be, but.
No, I just want to add, to Joe's point, that was some of the conversations that we had, and Joan and Liz can, definitely cross-check me on this, but that was the thought, was that because it's an elected board, the voters actually have a say on the terms, but there's no imposed term limit. Just to correct, so the Board of Education does have a term limit, but the Board of Education is special in the sense that a lot of it goes to state statute. But when it comes to Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen, yeah, we don't have the term limits. It's by vote.
Joan, you're on mute.
We lost them.
Yeah, I still can't hear
Well,
you, so.
Joan's trying to talk, she's mute, can we get her?
Joan, you're muted.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I've got a new system of microphone and video, so I just had to change it over. So the thought process was, first of all, on the appointed boards, that if the chairs knew that they had to give it up, then they would work with other people to move people into the chairmanship in the next, during the next rounds. And the second thing is the Board of Ed, I believe it's within their regulations that they have that. And there's nothing to say that the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance in their process and their procedures couldn't say, okay, we would like to do our own term limits, or, come back and recommend that to the next charter.
Hey, Joan, that's just for chairmanship, that's not obviously for an elected seat. There's no term limit. Oh, there is.
Correct.
Board of Ed.
Board of Ed
Yeah,
has
but
term
it's their
limits, that's right.
regulation, it's not in our charter.
I think it's 10 years.
Yeah, but it's not in our charter. That was never in the charter, so we didn't want to cross into that piece.
I think it's 12,
I just want to point out too that, and not to bore everyone with our deliberations, but this is the bifurcation that we had to take, the algorithm. There's the theoretical issues with these things, but also realistic. So theoretical, you could have an issue with these types of things that, somebody could take something over. But when it comes to, and I know this isn't the point of the question that was posed, but just so everyone knows, when it comes to the appointed boards, the reality is we just don't have enough volunteers. And so we do, so that those are two contrasting, schools of thought, and we're trying to make things that aren't exclusionary, they're more inclusive, and but at the same time, we also try to deal with the theoretical threat that it poses to.
It's a fine balance. It's not easy.
Some nights went pretty long.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
It's harder to get people.
Welcome to our world.
for office, for
Yeah.
sure. Joe, are you done? Is he gone?
I think he's gone.
Don't put his
So he's got his hand back up again. I don't know.
We've got some members of the public here, so we just need to close back up, okay?
Well, go ahead with the other public and I'll wait till the end.
Do you guys have questions?
I do.
Yep.
Dennis Crowe from 141 Twilight Drive. Just to amplify or to go back to what Joe asked about the term limits. The chairman. For elected boards, that's still, they select their own chairman, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Is that also term limited in this?
It's all appointed
Okay,
boards,
so the boards that are elected can keep their own chairman for as long as they want, okay? And second thing is, what's the timeline for this whole charter to take effect, assuming it passes the town referendum? What does it kick off in the next
I think November
fiscal year?
23, would it be November 23? First election?
It would, well, I think the charter would go into effect very quickly, but the next election would be impacted, so the 2023 municipal.
Any election.
Okay, so for instance,
Right.
you folks would have to run again.
Right, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
You wouldn't jump, just switch.
No.
And
It
same
would-
with me.
right, yeah.
Yeah, right.
But anyhow, okay, so, but the rest of it would take effect.
Lauren, are you on? I think it's pretty soon, right? After the vote, I can't remember if there's a date. There's a timeline by the state statute that says when it would go into effect.
The charter document says that it was in effect 30 days after the vote.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it would
I
kick
missed that.
in December, but it means for any elected stuff, that would apply to the next, the next year.
So may I add to Dennis's question? So that's for the, membership of boards and things. But when it comes to some of the boards themselves, that some have to be in place by statute, but some don't. And those are the ones that we want to change to ordinance. Those will be phased out over time and then put in as ordinance. So you will see a gradual changing of that. The document will go into effect, but you'll see a phasing approach to those.
It's a 2-year
Got it.
period for
Okay,
the
yes.
transition to ordinance for the documents.
Okay, great. Okay, that's all I've got, thank you.
Joe, could I ask a question, you and Joe, whoever else is here on the board? I'm gonna forget what I was gonna ask right now. Oh my goodness, I forgot it, it's gone, I'll remember it.
We have one more, I think Joe had an
Joe's got
additional
one more.
question. Go ahead, Joe.
In 2015, the referendum was defeated because it was, no one liked certain issues in there. So you explain how these are going to be on the referendum. How many issues, and is it going to get confusing for the public?
Well, that's what the board is going to be voting on tonight. I think we're mostly going to end up, we'll deliberate tonight, but we're going to have two questions. One is the 4-year term, which we think is the most significant change to the charter. There are other things that are important, but I think that's the most significant change. And then the other question would be to accept all the other changes. So there'll be two questions on the ballot.
Two questions. All right, so it shouldn't be confusing to the public.
No.
I remember I wanted to ask Joe and folks that are here, do you think that there are other questions after you've heard Peggy's presentation? Is there something else that stands out that maybe should be a separate question? We only came up with one, which was,
I'd like to add, I was turned down on my concern that the Planning and Zoning Commission, which is probably the third most important board or commission in this town, should be elected, not appointed, because the way the town is going with development. So I don't understand why that wasn't given a little more consideration. So I'm a little upset, but that's just me.
We actually went through several rounds on that question within the Charter Review Commission, several meetings on that. We reviewed other towns, and we also spoke to council. So it was pretty deliberative, and it was unanimous to keep it as an appointed rather than an elected.
Joan, when you were deliberating on that, do you recall at all finding out what percentage of towns have elected over appointed? Any idea? Lauren or anybody?
Honestly, I don't. And the thought process was, quite honestly, it potentially has the capability to be more political if it's an elected position versus an appointed position, because you're out there, you're campaigning on doing a platform that may not coincide with what is in our plan of conservation or anything like that. So it could become much more political, and that was one of the thought processes.
About 25 years ago, we had this conversation, and it was about this, and it was determined, really what Joan just said. That's why it was kept as appointed. And I remember the property that was in question was on Cops Road, and it was owned by Jack Davis at the time. He wanted to put a biopark, and it was very controversial. And people were pushing for an elected, or for whichever side they were on, I don't know. And it was a concern what Joan just said about someone could run on a platform of being supporting one particular project or development or something.
Okay, so I appreciate the comments. And any other public members of the public? No? Okay. Board member comments? No?
No.
Okay, well, great. So I just want to, for people who watch this later, there will be more information available on the website to review about the revisions, as well as this presentation and this recording. We may have to scrub some things because we're kind of technically, once we call the referendum questions, we might have to be on a quiet period. So we can't be seen as advocating necessarily as much as just providing information to the public. So, and we will probably have another public information session, a much simpler one prior to the November vote. I think we have to figure out what we're allowed to do during that time period. Because obviously this is August. The reason we're holding this now, just whoever's watching this later, is that we have to get these ballot questions to the state so it can be incorporated into the ballot for the November. So that's why we have this long time frame before we actually vote on this. So we wanted to hold one more before we actually vote on the questions.
Peggy, just excuse me, but as a newbie to town government, could you just explain quickly what the quiet period is for anybody that's watching this afterwards?
So the quiet period is basically that the town officials and board members and commission members cannot use town resources to advocate or one way or the other. I don't know what the right word is, but advocate one way or the other on something that's going to be on a ballot. And so, for example, with the referendum, we had to go through and scrub all the materials that were available on the website once we went into, because the website is a town resource, right? As individuals, we can make our own statements publicly, but not use town resources, town email. We can't use any of that stuff, but we can individually express our opinions in whether it's the editor or a personal email or personal Facebook pages. But anything that's a town paid for by town taxpayers' funds has to be neutral.
A mailer, anything like that,
Yeah.
we have to be very careful.
Right, and so, but what we do want to do, which we did for the referendums, is create what we call explanatory text, so that there's a lot more background, so people can kind of educate themselves, and that will be available online. It'll probably take us a week or two to get it ready, but it'll be ready by, September. It'll be in the town clerk's office as well as available on the website, so. Okay? All right, well, with that, because we've got our Board of Selectmen meeting starting in 7 minutes, I want to thank everybody who did join us today, thank you. And please encourage everybody to get out and vote November 8th. And particularly to get yourself educated on this issue, because it's very specific to Madison, and we want to get a lot of people to participate in the referendum. So thank you, and with that, I'll call a close to the public information session.
Thank you
So
again.
moved.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, gang.
Thank you, we want to have a question. Thank you.
Lauren, are we changing meetings?